And every single senior leader that we are interviewing now talks about, we are short-staffed. We need young people to come in and see what a great career this can be. And yet the culture that exists is very much old school. And Gen Zs are not going to look at that.
Oh, so trust is important to you, but people can't trust you unless they believe in you. They can't believe in you if you don't model what you say is important. I can't believe in you if you say all of these things are important, but then you also say, well, it was the heat of the moment, don't do what I do what I say. Right? Well, that's the opposite of building trust. That's the opposite of building integrity. So those two things, trust and integrity, are so closely related that we, in our work, can't separate them. You can't have one without the other. And if you don't have trust, it's probably because you don't have an integrity. And if you don't have any integrity, you can never have trust. And that's a lesson that's not taught in business school.
Those were the voices of Chris Edmonds, CEO and founder of the Purposeful Culture Group, and Mark Babbitt, CEO and founder of U-Turn and Work IQ. Welcome to Insights from the Coalface, elevating leadership beyond the boardroom. I'm Sarah Cole, a former solicitor turned life coach and founder of Cole Forums, a peer support network for CEOs and general counsel. This podcast is your exclusive access to high-trust conversation designed to inspire and empower leaders like you to thrive not just professionally but personally. In each episode, we'll delve into the challenges and triumphs of leadership, offering actionable insights and strategies to help you navigate complexity, foster resilience, and achieve authentic growth. So whether you're looking for fresh perspectives, practical advice, or a deeper connection to your leadership purpose, you're in the right place. Let's get started, and together we'll take your leadership beyond the boardroom. Mark Babbitt is a speaker, author, culture architect, and executive coach. He serves as president of Work IQ and is senior partner at the Purposeful Culture Group. Mark co-authors 2 best-selling books, Good Comes First and A World Gone Social. His thought leadership is also found in Inc., Entrepreneur, Forbes Inc., and many more. Chris Edmonds is a speaker, author, executive consultant, and founder of the Purposeful Culture Group. He's the author of 2 Amazon bestsellers, Good Comes First and The Culture Engine. He's been featured in the Wall Street Journal, Smart Brief, People, CNN, Fox 31, BBC TV, and Fast Company. Mark, Chris, thank you for joining me. I am so excited to dig into this conversation because what I must tell my listeners, Chris and I have actually been in conversation for 10 years and never met. So this is besides exciting for me. And I'm absolutely delighted that we're joined by your co-author, Mark, as well. And I'm really fascinated. How did you two meet? How did this even come about?
Well, we were both walking on the beach. No, that's not true at all. Mark, you've got to tell this story.
Okay. So I was actually closing keynote, me and my then business partner, at it's called the Ultimate Culture Conference in Chicago, Illinois. And down in the front row was this man I had never met before, but loved his book, knew he was just a leading thought leader in culture. And here I am in front of him delivering the closing keynote at this conference. So we finished the keynote. Chris was very kind, said some nice things. We ended up chatting for a bit that afternoon, and then that night went to Don Shula's Steakhouse in Chicago and talked for about 5 hours, and we haven't stopped talking since. I don't think.
I love those nights that come from nowhere and then you just really a soulmate, like-minded person. Amazing.
Absolutely. Well, and the entrepreneurial life is very isolated, and it can be very isolating. That's despite the fact that we're working with really cool clients that are nearly as passionate as we are about changing their culture. So for me to be able to connect to someone who was brilliant, slightly twisted, passionate about culture, and willing to see what we could do by merging our skills and passions. It was just delightful, and that was 9 years ago, 8 years ago, Mark, in there somewhere.
It seems like forever. And I'll tell you what, if you don't mind me sharing, what drew me to Chris to begin with was he shared my belief that company culture is a top-down leadership issue. It can't. Yes, there's subcultures everywhere, right? Even in the companies we work with, where we standardize culture, design it deliberately to be a certain way. Yes, there's subcultures even within those companies, but too many people to this day believe that company culture can be delegated, can be, it's an HR problem or it's a middle manager problem. No, company culture, Chris and I both believe and still believe to this day is absolutely a top-down leadership issue. And Chris was the only one that I had met to that point that believed that as strongly as I did. And so there was an immediate connection there.
So I was reading this morning, it's a really interesting statistic, which was that 94% of leaders and executives now think culture is important. But it seems to me there's a disconnect because they might think it's important, but they're not taking ownership of it. They're not thinking, right, this is for me now to enact in my own organization. Is that your experience?
Oh my Lord, absolutely. And part of our premise is that leaders have never been asked to manage culture. They've never been taught how to change culture. They are literally focused on that which they have been trained to focus on, which is results, results, results. And getting results at large costs is just what they were trained to do in school, what their mentors did as they were getting their feet wet, what their current bosses do from a modeling standpoint, just get results. And we we had a potential client who fell short of us inviting him into our circle. Who CEO who said, "I don't care if people are happy. I just want them to produce." I believe you believe that. Bye-bye. Thanks for lunch. So the idea is we have to get those leaders to move from culture is important to culture is something very important to me, and I need help to figure out how to evolve it. Mark, is that fair?
Well, it's not only fair, I mean, Sarah, we've literally had to walk away from clients who, another quick story, if you don't mind. We did our surveys, we did our discovery work, and we went in to tell the executive of the company, newly appointed, by the way, not the executive who brought us in, but the successor to the executive who asked for our help. And he said, "You know what? All we did was ask all the right questions that just allowed everybody just to bitch. And they can either adapt to the culture that we have or they can leave." And I just got up and said, "I can't help you." So I had to call Chris. Yeah, I had to call Chris and go, I just said, "We're done. We can't possibly help that mindset." And again, it's not every client that some of our best clients are actually people who have either had something happen in their personal lives. COVID is a great example where people started working from home, even executives, and went, "Wow, I didn't even know this was possible, let alone that I would like it." For me personally, I want this to be a permanent part of my culture. And and so, well, that's great, but how do you evolve your company culture to now include remote working where everybody feels isolated, right? So that's a whole different challenge. Other people have had health crises and go, "I don't want to be known as this jerk who drives results. I want people to actually like the company that I built, and we work very well with those people who had those epiphanies. And I'll share with you that Chris and I have found that we like working with women leaders and people of color significantly more than most old white men, because most old white men are so set in their ways and so results driven that the problem is never them. The problem is always somebody else. It's HR didn't do their job. It's hiring brought in the wrong people. Well, no, you design your culture first, and then you hire people based on who might fit best within that culture. And so, yeah, it's a challenge sometimes.
I'm fascinated by this. So tell me, so you've met your CEO who's maybe not taking ownership of his own role. How do you shift the mindset of that person? I mean, how do you both approach that?
Well, I'll tell you, Mark hit it early. We do surveys and discovery, including interviewing folks from different levels, different divisions, to get a more complete picture. Absent living in the culture for 10 years, we need to get an idea of how it operates, and then we do a written summary where we don't say, "Oh, and Sheena said this." We don't do that. It's patterns, and it's here's the trends that you have that are going to either potentially, if you leverage them, benefit a culture that is purposeful, positive, productive, God forbid, or they're going to erode that. They're going to inhibit that. But the other piece is our process is such that we will help you then, if you're ready, as a senior leadership team and CEO, president, to move forward with defining your ideal culture. And there's a bit of a process with that, but in essence, we help them define a servant purpose. Who do you serve? How does your community benefit from what you do? And they look at us like that's not something we've thought about before. Oh, good, we've got some time, so we're going to think about it. But more importantly, and the really foundational piece is, what are the values you want? You may already have those. Your corporate entity may have told you what your organizational values are, but what are the behaviors that align to those values? Because the values alone don't make everyone magically treat others with respect, work cooperatively, solve problems together. That doesn't happen when unless we have leaders who model those behaviors, who measure those behaviors, who then hold people accountable for those behaviors. And often that is where the leaders that we deal with are looking for help, right? And obviously that's what we do. We typically invest about 6 months or so in the define stage, working with those executives and next level leaders. And then we shift to executive coaching, because the trick is, can we change those leaders' mindsets to say, oh, I'm driving our culture, to, oh crap, I don't know how to drive our culture, which then lets us go to the mode of, you've got wonderful, very observable, tangible, measurable behaviors. You've got some senior leaders who are not modeling them. Let's talk about how you're going to hold them accountable. So it doesn't start at the front line leaders level. It doesn't start at the next level. It starts at the C-suite, to say, if you have leaders who are now acting against your defined valued behaviors, then that's going to erode any chance of the culture taking hold.
And does that align with the 4 pillars that you mention in the book, Good Comes First, that you both wrote together? Because I was interested around that, because I thought I've done a lot of values work myself in a former life. And I found that sort of bringing the culture or the values to life, the operationalization of those values was the tricky bit. So almost like you said, either they'd come up with the values themselves, or corporate had sent them some values that they had to somehow bring to life. And the disconnect again was between what those values even meant. Sometimes they were just words like integrity or whatever. And there was no real thought behind what that looked like for their organization.
Well, I will. I'm glad you brought that up, because we, even in our work, we tend to jump straight to values, and we constantly have to remind ourselves and our executives that, if you're going to build a house on quicksand, it's probably going to sink at some point, or crumble at some point. And so our foundational principles that we mentioned in the book are what we, that's our foundation. That's our bedrock. And if you don't believe, for instance, that, as an executive, one of our foundational principles is respect is equally as important as results. And if you don't genuinely believe that, if you don't believe workplace respect is half your job, driving results as an executive is certainly the other half, right? We don't live in a fantasy world where we want to build this kumbaya great culture, but nobody does anything, right? We have to keep the lights on. But if you don't believe that that fostering, modeling workplace respect is just as important as driving results, then we probably aren't the right consultants for you. And it starts with something as foundational as that is your mindset at the point where you're just throwing words at this problem? You're just throwing money at this problem? You're saying and all the right things, but you're not doing anything? Well, that's almost a fortune teller thing where Chris and I can look at an executive and go, you are not modeling the behaviors. You're not living the foundational principles. And that's got to be our next conversation. Now, I will tell you, we work with executives from all over the spectrum. We just recently did a survey where the CEO of the company, as rated by his peers, all the people in the company, received the worst possible scores of the entire company, right? Like, all the people he hired are scoring amazing, and his scores, while improving, are still the worst in the company. And yet his incremental improvement is worthy of celebration. I mean, he started as this hard-nosed, my way or the highway, workplace respect. Who cares about that? I just got to stop good people from leaving. If I need to be respectful, whatever, right? But now he's genuinely, like, we know when he sees these test results, he's still not going to be happy with his scores, but they're so much better than they were 2 years ago, right? So we're not looking for client partners who have already drank the culture Kool-Aid. We're looking for executives that are uh, uh, socially aware enough, self-aware enough that their legacy leadership style might be part of the problem. And if they're open at all to changing some of that, we can help them.
But this is interesting to me because I remember thinking with your A World Gone Social book that you wrote, Mark, that you were kind of massively ahead of the curve in predicting workplace shifts and the sort of movement from sort of command and control, or I don't know, what do we call it, industrial age type management. And just in any case, I suppose those people that you're talking about are struggling with that shift, I'm guessing, right?
Well, a decade later, we're still. I mean, when A World Gone Social came out, we had a major publisher say it's too ahead of its time. We're not ready for this. And so when Chris and I started talking about writing Good Comes First, we had to say, we need to be topical. We need to be in the right now. Everybody's talking about the future of work. We need to be talking about the now of work. So we wrote a manuscript, 2020, 2019 we started, and we talked all about how very soon everybody was going to have to actually embrace this remote working, virtual working, hybrid working. And we wrote this wonderful manuscript about how leaders are going to have to adapt to people working from home. And we turned it into the publisher, and 3 weeks later, the world shut down because of COVID. And everybody, well before the book was published, was now working from home. And yeah, and Chris and I, as this COVID thing developed and people were really struggling, not just with culture culture issues based on working from home, but productivity and isolation and mental health. And Chris and I would go, yep, that was page 212 of the manuscript we don't have to throw away because all of this happened too damn soon. And so we had to step back, and we probably should have done this with the world gone social too, and said, we can't talk about the future, we have to talk about now. And COVID made the original manuscript of Good Comes First completely obsolete because overnight the world changed. And the point of all that isn't that we had to rewrite the manuscript. The point is that the executives now were literally in oh my God mode. Like, I have no idea how to deal with this.
Well, they weren't the only one. It wasn't just executives thinking that, was it? It was the whole workforce.
Oh, no, no. And to your point about command and control industrial age leadership style, what did most executives do? And what are they doing now, especially since the election here in the United States? They're reverting back to what they know, which is command and control, my way or the highway. Don't care if you like it. Our president is the role model for this. Elon Musk is his right-hand man, and we believe in what they're doing. And so guess what? That gives me permission to be a total jerk, and I'm going to go back to what I know best. And so a lot of the work that we prescribe, a lot of the styles, where workplace respect is just as important as results, is here in the United States anyway, being turned on its ear because of this old white male boomer male syndrome we call in the book syndrome. It's just, yeah, it's a weird dynamic right now.
And it just doesn't reconcile with the real world. I also read that 73% of employees have left their role because they didn't feel they were a good fit for the cultural fit. So with that in mind, all I'm hearing from CEOs is talent retention is a problem, and that they invest all this money in training people and then they move on, and it's all very frustrating. But it's almost like they've missed the point.
I think you're exactly right. And what's interesting is now, and we work with all kinds of different um, industry clients, and so it's very broad ranged. And we've got a client we're going to come see in March that is in public safety corrections, so a law enforcement kind of environment, and every single senior leader that we are interviewing now talks about we are short staffed. We need young people to come in and see what a great career this can be. And yet the culture that exists is very much old school. And Gen Zs are not going to look at that and go, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, I want to go into this environment where I have no voice, maybe, or there's not, flexibility, whatever it may be. So our core mantra is that good for you leaders to manage results. That's half your job. The other half is managing respect, which is where our foundational principle and cornerstones comes into play. You need a servant purpose that shows who you are serving, and then you need to kind of monitor it to see if you actually are serving your customers and your communities well. That's pretty rare. We need to define your values in observable behaviors that demonstrate respect. And then there's the results that you have to deliver. We get that.
Sorry, if you don't mind if I just dwell on that, because that's really very interesting to me. What does good look like with this respect point? What what behaviours would you say, oh yes, that's what we're looking for here? 'Cause I know that my leaders will be hanging on your word here, thinking, right, am I actually demonstrating this back at the ranch?
Yeah, yeah. Well, and it goes back to the example that Mark said of the January run of this small company where the CEO was rated quite a bit poorly than the rest of the staff. That is a values and behaviors survey. It's not a production analysis. It is not a quote, how well do you meet performance expectations review. It is how well do you live the values and behaviors that you defined for this company. So there's a bit of a um, leaders have to be willing to get feedback that may not be pretty, but that's also our job to help them make sense of it and say, aha, as Mark said, this CEO has done tremendous growth in 2 years and is on a 6 point scale, 3/4 of a point below the rest of his staff. And it's like, okay, now you have to really change how you interact with people every day. And it's not about production, it's about respect. So they've defined respect differently than our healthcare organization, differently than the law enforcement organization, different than the waste management company we work with, different than the largest retailer on the planet defined respect. But respect behaviors have to literally reflect how do the best people interact with their peers and their customers, and God forbid, even their vendors and their bosses in the workplace. So respect might be I go directly to the people I have an issue with and work it out with them. Respect might be I do what I say I will do. So if I make a promise, I follow it up. Well, some might say, well, that's more of an integrity value. Integrity is something that you may want to consider. So we convert it from aspirational hopes to this is how I behave. And the behaviors, we don't give a list of 20 behaviors to clients because we don't live in their culture. But if we can help them come to a comfortable definition of observable, tangible, measurable behaviors that fit excellence. One of this company's values, which I love, is trusted voice. They need to be a trusted voice to their clients and to their peers. So, well, how do you define that? It's like, well, you don't lie, cheat, and steal. No, yes, that's probably a good behavior set, but we want to have positive statements of how you treat others and how you behave. So, every client comes up with a mix of behaviors that's slightly different. Ultimately, respect comes up almost every time. Integrity comes up, teamwork comes up. Um, Mark, what have I missed? Oh, and trust absolutely comes, and we have mutual trust, we have mutual respect, we have trust and respect. And they're very, very, once you get to the behavioral level, they're very similar. But the trick is not just defining them. The trick is measuring, monitoring, coaching.
Again, I read that the Edelman statistic on trust, which was 62% of workers just don't trust their management. They don't trust their leadership. I I worry about that statistic. That really unsettled me because I think if we all accept that trust and transparency and respect and all the things that you're talking about are part of a good culture, and 94% of leaders, as we've already established, think that culture is important, I don't understand why they're not focusing on trust and demonstrating trust. Is this something you've come across or?
Every day. Yeah, every day. We often have to tell executives because everybody jumps to integrity, right? And they know that trust is also important, but they haven't quite figured out that you can't fix the trust issue until you have fixed the integrity issue. And it's, there's real world examples all the time. You say, for example, that you hire only the best people for every job. And then you bring your nephew in who is nowhere near qualified for the job you just gave him, right? You say integrity is important to us, but boy, we need that third quarter shareholder report to look good. So we're going to just move a few things here and there so the shareholders see the pretty picture, not the current reality. Well, that's not an integrity-based decision, right? You say that company culture is important, but we literally hear you screaming as our leader. We hear you screaming at people down the hall. That's an integrity issue. Because I mean, if you're a screamer, you're a screamer, right? There's lots of us that are screamers. And I coached baseball for 30 years. I get it, but you can't say company culture is important and then be a screamer, right? So that is an integrity issue. And we have to convince our client partners that, so trust is important to you, but people can't trust you unless they believe in you. They can't believe in you if you don't model what you say is important. I can't believe in you if you say all of these things are important, but then you also say, well, it was the heat of the moment. Don't do what I do what I say. Right? Well, that's the opposite of building trust. That's the opposite of building integrity. So those two things, trust and integrity, are so closely related that we, in our work, can't separate them. You can't have one without the other. And if you don't have trust, it's probably because you don't have an integrity. And if you don't have any integrity, you can never have trust. And that's a lesson that's not taught in business school. That's not a lesson passed down to us from our predecessors and our mentors. That's oh my God, I'm a jerk. I didn't realize what a jerk I was being. And I didn't mean to. I'm actually like if you go and have a beer with me at happy hour, I'm the nicest guy on the planet. But you know what? Sometimes life gets to us. Sometimes work situations get to us, and I turn into a jerk. And when I did, I didn't model any of the values, any of the behaviors that I've been saying is important. And that's an epiphany for many.
Well, and Sarah, one of the things, and it's so critical, we do a 2-day face-to-face where we can. And during the pandemic, we were creative with virtual kind of technology at that, which worked well. But one of the things we do is let's talk about the things that happen today in your day-to-day operations, in relationships and project teams. What kinds of interactions and behaviors build trust? And they list them on one half of a chart pad, right? And on the other side of that page, what kinds of interactions erode trust? And of course, we mix up groups with different levels at different tables, and there is a degree of surprise and maybe shock at how frustrated people are, even in leadership positions. They may not be C-suites, but they be directors, next level leaders, are frustrated at the practices and the behaviors of their whole peer group as leaders that erode trust every day. And it's never been a focus. So it's just part of how we operate here. That's a problem.
It's a fascinating one. And I'm thinking as well of the listener now who is sitting there wondering what red flags they should be looking out for, what that might indicate toxicity like that in their own organizations. Have you any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's actually really simple. Sorry, Chris, I'll jump in real quick, and then I'll let you.
We're both getting excited on this one, so
This is a hot button. Just a hot. Yeah, and we just wrote about this. We just talked about this. Contradictions. If your workplace is constantly experiencing contradictions on any level, from on a scale of 1 to 10, 2 or 3 happens every day. Well, we can sometimes rationalize that, but when you get into that 8, 9, 10 on a scale of 1 to 10 contradictions, like just blatant disrespect, and I'll give you a real quick example. And we pick on sales guys all the time, but um, because salespeople tend to be alpha male in nature, and and you, oh yes, they're only because almost exclusively because they're results driven. Well, if your top salesperson is in the break room telling sexist jokes, hitting on the females staff members, belittling people of color, all in the name of fun, all in the name of comic
And in their
relief,
defense, they're looking at results.
but and that's what they say, "Oh, I was just teasing." Well, no, it actually that's not it's like completely unacceptable. Well, if one of your values is mutual respect and your top salesman, your top performer is constantly making other people feel uncomfortable in the workplace, that is a blatant contradiction of our values. And if you're tolerating that, then we can't have respect, we can't have trust, we can't have integrity. That's our company culture, whether we as an executive want to admit it or not. Our company culture makes it okay for our top performers to be total jerks, and it's okay, right? Well, sorry, that's a contradiction of our values, and you tolerating that makes you a contradiction of our values. And so we can literally look at executives and ask the question on a daily basis from your executive team, how many times are you putting your people in a position of witnessing contradictions? And that question alone can light people up, and just it's like, "Oh my god, I had no idea. I had no idea."
And traditionally, the corporate hero was the guy or woman who was bringing in the numbers, and they could get away with blue murder. And I feel like how leaders will struggle with, well, how do I make my corporate hero somebody who is demonstrating the behaviors that we want to create a good culture? The results are the results. So what kind of incentives or I don't know, I put that word in your mouth, but what kind of things can they do to achieve the corporate hero shift so that it's a person more aligned with their values?
Well, and it once again gets back to let's define your ideal culture, which includes measurable behaviors connected to your values. Then you actually measure them. And then in the midst of that, you're coaching, you're modeling, you're celebrating folks that are doing the right thing. And if there is someone who is not living in alignment to those behaviors, in many, many organizations, those are hugely difficult conversations for leaders to have. So since they don't want to have them, they're not good at it. They'd rather have a heart transplant than do that. Then there's no conversation. There is literally no consequence whatsoever, which everybody is watching. Everybody is watching. Your employees don't miss a trick. And I want to do my story of I was a nonprofit executive for 15 years. And of course, I started out driving buses and running camps, right? So YMCA executive. And I got into um, an organization, small metropolitan organization, and there were 5 branches. And every year, like many nonprofits, we are raising money. And so here at the annual celebration of all the branches in the metro who had raised X amount of money, and did we beat our target for the year, yada, yada, yada. So I had the senior VP pull me aside at the start of the program and say, I know you guys raised $22,000, which was huge for the branch I had. I need you to say you've raised 28. And so I'm thinking, Are we on candy camera somewhere? Is this a test? And no, that's what he wanted me to do. He says, you're going to raise it over the year anyway. Not the point. The point is a lie. And at that moment, I knew I could not stay there. Now, it took me about 6 months to find a different job, but I refused to lie in front of 300 volunteers. I said, we've raised 23 and we're darn proud of it. And of course, my 30 volunteers are up cheering and stuff. But the issue was, if I'm being asked to lie, that is a huge red flag around values alignment and integrity and respect. So the trick is that you cannot, as a leader, tolerate any behaviors that are not aligned. Now, that is half the opportunity. The other half of the opportunity is that employees of all generations, of all diverse thinking, be it experiences and genders and races, etc., desire and deserve to be respected and validated for their aligned ideas, efforts, and contributions. Now, that's a cool bumper sticker. You'd need a big car with a big bumper. But if we can get leaders to not only accept the mindset that culture is important and culture matters day to day, that they have to model demonstrating respect and validating people's efforts every frickin' day.
Looking back at both your careers, I'm really interested because I know you both did other things, right, before you immersed yourself in this topic. What do you think is the biggest lesson? I mean, you both said a lot about respect, but I wonder what's the biggest lesson that that career has taught you around leadership that you could share?
Well, let me jump in with, so I had my worst boss experience in nonprofit, but I also had the best boss experience in nonprofit. And I worked for a gentleman named Jerry Nutter, rest his soul, who was hilarious, which was a huge hook for me, of course. But he was such a champion for the work that our nonprofits were doing. And one of the things I noticed about him was that and I worked on his team for 3 years, that if we missed the mark, he was very quick to tell us that fell short. And what are we going to do? It was kind of the after action review thing. And it wasn't that he crucified us, he invited us to plan and to be aware and to what could we have done different, that kind of thing. And I had plenty of bosses that did the crucifixion thing, did the yeller thing. So, and I tell a story about Jerry that in one of the branches that I worked with him at, it was a huge facility, and it was childcare and swimming and racquetball and yoga and mommy and me classes in the pool. Jerry would do a tour every morning, and then later in the afternoon he'd do a tour, and he would watch the classes. He would engage with the leaders of those classes. He would try yoga moves, and he was not good at it, but he was present, and he was, in essence, trying to catch those leaders and those instructors modeling the values of our organization. And then he'd pull them aside and say, thank you. And so when there were quarterly all staff meetings and Jerry would come in the room, people would flock to him. It was like the Pied Piper. And when you have a yeller and when you have someone who doesn't care about respect and integrity, they don't flock.
I wonder if that's about caring as well. You genuinely cared. I often observe that the best leaders are the ones that really care. What about yourself, Mark? You've had a long career doing lots of different things as well. I think you're in the military as well, weren't you?
Yes, the military, law enforcement, baseball, football coach, and then I had real jobs. I I think the biggest thing that Chris and I maybe together have learned, other than the importance of just showing up and caring for your people, And by the way, we have a colleague of ours, Tamara McCleary, who genuinely believes that you cannot be a good leader if you don't genuinely care about the people you're leading. And so we use her words all the time to describe how important it is to show up and care. Uh, I think the biggest thing for me has been the accountability issue. And as a high school, college coach, accountability is built into our system. If you, as a ball player, let's just say you're playing third base on our baseball team and you decide to phone it in for a couple weeks in a row, you get a little cocky, you think, oh, good, I earned the starting spot, and you don't keep working hard, you don't contribute positively to the culture, you don't get, you don't hit the 300 that you were hitting before, then it's literally my job as a coach to find a better third baseman. But do it in a way that inspires that person who isn't doing well right now to be accountable, to hold himself accountable for doing what got him here. For being the best third baseman he can be, I have to keep inspiring him to do that while I'm looking for his replacement. And I kick in that recruitment process when it's clear to me that third baseman is not holding himself accountable for the same standards I hold him to. And so in sports, accountability is systemic, right? But in the corporate world, in the workplace, and we talked about that sales guy, well, I'm a top performer. You'll never fire me, right? I don't have to hold myself accountable. But you know what? I've been here 6 years. I've been telling those racist jokes, the sexist jokes in the break room for 6 years, and you've never held me accountable either. Why should I hold myself accountable? Right? And so, especially since COVID, when people found themselves working at home and they were tempted to click on Netflix instead of getting that report done, or they had a puppy in the background driving him or her crazy, hypothetically, and now we're spending time with a puppy instead of getting our work done, are we learning a pretty important lesson about accountability? Absolutely. Right. And so, especially since COVID, accountability has been a trigger for 90% of us humans. And here's the problem with that is unless we're very self-aware, we're completely incapable of holding ourselves accountable. And so as a byproduct of accountability is self-awareness. And those are two character traits that Chris and I literally talk about every day. And that's been the biggest lesson for me is how do I, without being a jerk, without being too hard on myself, keeping all of the mental health issues at the forefront, without becoming a workaholic again, how do I hold myself accountable in a realistic, fair, generous way? How do I get everything done that's expected of me that I expect of myself without letting my employer ruin my life? And so so with accountability comes balance, comes the self-awareness, comes all of this stuff. And it's all new to all of us as working human beings.
And that work-life balance also interests me because I know both of you have got passions. You already mentioned the coaching, Mark, and I know you're a huge musician, Chris. And you've both got families. I think you've got 5 children, Mark, I read, which scared me because I only have 1 and it feels like one job. But how do you help your leaders from all the experiences that you've both had with getting that life balance or always working towards it? I'm sure we never ever get it right, but how do you help them manage that? Because I think that accountability that you're talking about, all the issues that we've spoken about, responsibility, respect, they all filter through to our home lives. And the balance, I think, is something I hear time and time again from leaders they really struggle with. So have you got any pearls of wisdom for them there?
Well, I'll tell you one of the interesting things about the work that Mark and I do is help those leaders realize that they may be preaching well-being and work-life balance and exercise and eating healthy and whatnot, but they don't live it. And everybody's watching. Remember, everybody's watching. So the idea is that if we're going to be our best as life partners, as parents, as community members, there's a responsibility we have of being at our best. And physically at our best takes investment of time. And there's a point of which the band has retired here for a couple of years. Pandemic changed the music business quite a bit locally. But I would, have my cool little smartwatch count my steps. And when we would do shows, my steps would go from 5,000 a day to 20,000 a day because we're unloading the trailer, we're setting up gear, we're working, we're entertaining, we're selling ourselves to the crowd to do the next gig, that kind of stuff. And I felt the next day, oh, baby, that was way more steps than I'm used to. And it's like, I need to figure out how to do more steps. Now, with steps alone, especially after the heart attack, this was 1993, that I had the myocardial infarction, and I've lost weight and I've done better, but I'm still too heavy. So there's that constant choice of what am I eating today? How many steps am I doing today? Because Mark and I get on phone calls with executives that are frustrated with life, their senior leadership team, their dog, whatever, every day. And we have to be present, calm. Okay, for us, it's always we're going to be funny. But we have to be ready to find the lever that might be most helpful for that player in an hour. And we do 4 calls a day. So if well-being doesn't have priority for you, you're not going to be as good a human, flat out. And so, again, easy to say, hard to do. I am not a great model of that. But if you've got people who, and Mark, you've got a wonderful example from Blue Cross Blue Shield about life balance.
Well,
What are you doing here?
yeah. And I'll make this, it's a long story, but I'll make it really quick. So we were working with the CIO of a company, knew that the IT group, 600 people out of 6,000 employees, had a toxic subculture. And so he brought us in. We didn't go in and talk to the CEO. This was Mark Gregory, a wonderful leader. And he brought us in to help fix his subculture. And it was one of the most interesting things we've ever done. And Mark was an intimidating white male, a bodybuilder, shaved his head bald, just a huge presence physically, emotionally. He had come to the conclusion that sometimes people found him intimidating. And it's the opposite of the leader he wanted to be. And so we had lots of talks about how to fix that, as if he's not going to stop lifting weights. He's not going to grow his hair out. He's not going to become Mr. Rogers overnight. So how do we fix that? Well, he and I were both working late one night. And again, I used to take great pride in my workaholic tendencies. I don't anymore. But he and I were both working very late one night. And I noticed him, even in the late evenings, walking the hallways with his head completely down in his phone or in his iPad. And the only time he would look up was to hit the button on the elevator. And then he would look down again. And so I watched him over the next couple of days. And sure enough, every time he left his huge corner office, he would walk through the hallways with that phone in front of his face. And so I challenged him and I said, so you you're self-aware enough to know that you come across as intimidating. You are accountable for fixing that. You've asked me how to fix that. Maybe you should put the damn phone down. Maybe you should make some eye contact. Maybe you should engage in conversations with the engineers running all around you. And so I challenged him and I said, you and I were both here late the other night. And I this I observed you walking through the hallways. You did not engage in conversation one time. One time. And here's what's odd about that. All of those people are all salaried just like you are. They're not getting paid to be there at 7:30, 8 o'clock at night. And you didn't even come close to recognizing them being there late, working late. I said, so next time you do that, I'll be with you. Let's try it. Let's do it together. I'm not going to ask you to do something I wouldn't do myself. Let's just walk the building and let's look at people and go, wow, what are you guys doing here? Shouldn't you be home with your wife, your kids, your spouse, your husband? What are you doing here so late? What's keeping you here so late? And how can I help you so we're not all here so late? And so he did that evening. And he looked at me after, I don't know, hour and a half of these, we called them random acts of leadership. And we went back to his corner office and he said, holy crap, that was amazing. Like I actually talked to people. Yes, Mark, you did. It was great. And the next morning, again, workaholic tendencies, I was there quite early. And in the break room, the entire staff was abuzz that scary Mark Gregory had walked through the hallways and not only engaged, but asked the question, how can I help you so you're not working this many hours? What can we change so we all find the balance that we all crave? And it literally overnight changed the perceived culture. And we literally tell the story all the time as an example to leaders to say, how are you personally helping your team find that balance, find that willingness to be accountable? How are you showing accountability yourself? How are you showing up, demonstrating the values that the company says? There's a big poster on the wall. It says what our values are. Nobody even reads the poster anymore because we know it's a bunch of crap. So how are you showing up personally? And it's just a huge lesson for most leaders to learn.
And maybe a lesson in empathy as well, because he's actually empathizing with those employees, right? In their position, why are they there? What could they be doing instead?
Yes. Yep. Well, and I'll tell you, talk about accountability, talk about empathy. You can't ask those questions like Mark did without then immediately doing something to follow up on what they told you. Otherwise, it's another example of contradictions. Well, if you're not going to do anything about it, why did you ask? And if you're not going to do anything about it, then that tells me you were insincere in asking.
Which is the same issue with surveys that have no action points once you've got all the results and the data.
Well, and we told Mark and we tell executives all the time, here's the problem with you asking those kind of questions. Here's the problem with you doing surveys is now they know that you know. And if now you choose not to do anything about it, you are the walking contradiction.
I have loved our conversation. Our time, sadly, is coming to an end together. I have really enjoyed, as I knew I would. 10 years in the waiting was well worth the wait, Chris. And one question I'm asking every participant of the podcast, and I'd really like your reflections on it before we leave each other. And the question is, if you could create a leader's survival kit, what would you put in it? And I'm going to ask Chris first. Put you on the spot, Chris.
We had a wonderful small company that we worked with that as we helped them through defining their values and behaviors, and this was a big organization, they did a cool, and I have it somewhere. I don't know if I can put my hands on it, but it was a little, kind of business card, credit card sized little unfoldable 2 wings that had their servant purpose, their values, and their behaviors. And on the back, it said, here's how you can touch base with folks every day. So do this, meet people in the break room, have a lunch with Larry, kind of, wonderful connection with Rosita, whatever. And so everybody had those laminated little cards. And the reality is, boy, I'd love you to put a timer on your phone. So every hour and a half it would ping, and that's your notice to reach out to people who are working from home and just check in, to go wander the halls if you have an actual facility, to do that check-in kind of a thing. But the reality is, if we can help leaders define what their ideal culture is, that's 1% of the work involved. 99% is walking around, modeling it, catching people doing great things that you want to celebrate, catching people doing misaligned things that you have to coach. You've got to be able to make the culture real. So literally, for me, it would be power bars, right? And maybe some chocolate, right? But the focus was so great. And they had tremendous impact with that. Because I remember us doing a day-long culture leadership training for this organization's next level leaders. We had 450 people in 5 rooms. So we broke it down to small groups of 110. It was an interesting learning experience, but every one of them had that cool little foldable brochure. And all we talked about was, how do you change your habits and how do you change the connections that you have with people? That's what I'd put in it.
Well, clarifying question. Does it have to be something tangible that I would put in the toolkit? Like something you hold?
I don't think so. No, I don't think it has to be tangible.
Okay. All right. So I'm gonna answer the question 2 different ways then. One, I would package common sense. I just think we've completely lost our way, whether it's because we're so results driven or so ego driven. We've stopped building personal relationships, especially executives. We've stopped caring about the people who love us at home because we've become workaholics or whatever phrase we're using to describe the lack of balance. I would give the gift of common sense, or put that in the box. But I'll tell you the other thing, and I was asked a similar question on a panel, 8-9 years ago, and I instinctively said I would put in a mirror. And everybody went, a mirror? I said, yeah, because we don't look at ourselves in the mirror enough. And it gets to the point Chris was just making, that if we don't have time to reflect on how we are showing up, we're not showing up how we want. If we're making excuses for operating in a way that's counter to our values, right, and we can't look ourselves in the mirror and own that, we're not making corrections. We're not making adjustments. And until we can seriously look at ourselves in the mirror and be happy with what we see, we're going to keep being that same person.
I love that. And both of you avoided saying to pack a copy of Good Comes First, but I think that should definitely be included in the toolkit, Jen. Thank you so much for your time. I really, really appreciate it. Until next time.
Thank you, Sarah.
That's it for today's episode of Insights from the Coalface, Elevating Leadership Beyond the Boardroom. I hope this conversation left you with fresh insights, new perspectives, and a deeper connection to the challenges and opportunities of leadership. If you found value in today's discussion, I'd love for you to share it with your network, leave a review, or reach out to me with your thoughts. Leadership can be a lonely road, but it doesn't have to be. Let's keep learning, growing, and supporting each other. Until next time, stay resilient, stay authentic, and keep leading with purpose.